The United Nations, as well as the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, have proven themselves to be among the most bitter anti-Semitic enemies of Israel. To address this complicated battleground, I am proud to present British barrister and one of the most eloquent voices for the Jewish people today, Natasha Hausdorff.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What a privilege to be amongst so many of you, individuals and organizations that are fighting in this battle for truth, justice, and the equal treatment for the Jewish state of Israel. You, so many of you, are at the forefront of the battle against the United Nations and the use of international courts to weaponize international law against the only Jewish state. The United Nations has for many decades been a victim of the battle between the rule of law countries, Israel, the UK, the United States, those countries that view rule of law as a curtailment on government power. A battle between those states and those despots and dictatorships that in contrast view the rule of law and the use of law as a means of wielding power. And as increasingly we see this battle manipulating the law and international law in particular against Western interests, we have to understand that this is not just Israel's fight, but Israel is at the forefront of a fight against Western civilization as a whole. And nowhere do we see that more powerfully, more forcefully than in the international courts and tribunals, the ICJ and the ICC in particular. It's no accident that when Richard Heidemann interviewed Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, the first few questions were about this battle against Israel in the international arena, this abuse of law, this weaponization of law, and the inversion of key legal terms like occupation, ethnic cleansing, colonialism, apartheid, genocide. Let's just take a moment and understand what is being done to each of these terms. Because remember, what starts with the State of Israel will not end with the State of Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, where was there an occupation? Well, Jordan's occupation of East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, where Jews were ethnically cleansed from those territories. Where is the real apartheid? If you travel through Yehuda v'Shomron, or as some call it, the West Bank, there are big red signs that warn Israelis from entering Area A. They don't really mean Israelis, because we see Israeli Arabs going backwards and forwards. No, ladies and gentlemen, those areas are Judenrein. That is the real ethnic cleansing. That is the real apartheid. Colonialism? Look around you. Israel is the decolonization success story. My family lived under Ottoman rule and then British Mandate rule before establishing or re-establishing the Jewish state of Israel in 1948. And then we come to the term genocide. The inversion of this term. I don't just mean with respect to the acts of genocide and the Holocaust that gave rise to the term, that prompted Raphael Lemkin to coin this term, to provide legal terminology for those atrocities that were committed against the Jewish people. And only yesterday and the day before in the March of the Living, we commemorated those lives that were lost and reaffirmed our commitment to never again. I don't just mean the Holocaust that gave rise to the term genocide, but those acts of genocide on the 7th of October that were again committed against Jews because they were Jews. The inversion of that term and the projection in each and every one of these instances, what was done to the Jewish people themselves are being accused of. And it is the law and international courts that are being weaponized for this purpose. I am truly privileged that over the last decade, I have worked with phenomenal lawyers, led by Jonathan Turner of UK Lawyers for Israel, and in partnership with so many organizations that are present here today, we have been moving the needle against these abuses of international law. We have been standing up, we have been making legal submissions that have been embraced by some legal academics and even by some judges of the International Court of Justice. Former Vice President Julia Sebutinde. Give her a round of applause. Her commitment to the rule of law, to real international law, and her continued calling out of the bias of those judges that were led by the previous president, Judge Salem, with his own vicious track record against the state of Israel. The very fact that that judge that the international community did not demand that judge recuse himself tells us everything that we need to know about where these institutions have gone. And that UK Lawyers for Israel have pointed out the abuse of facts at these institutions too. When Karim Khan's application for arrest warrants against the leaders of the only Jewish state were predicated entirely on false information, ladies and gentlemen, we proved that every phrase of every sentence of Karim Khan's application, which he made public, his public summary, every phrase of every sentence was false. That international courts and tribunals seek to rehabilitate themselves and their shocking reputations and failing to live up to the lofty ideals that they were founded with, that they seek to rehabilitate themselves by going after the Jewish state, this must end. And with your help, I believe that we can end it. This, ultimately, is the eighth front. The eighth front in this war that is being waged against Israel. Look at the extraordinary successes that the Jewish people, the IDF, the security forces, have managed to achieve in those 7 fronts. The eighth front, ladies and gentlemen, is winnable too. If we reaffirm our commitment to truth, justice, and real international law, and we don't shy away from expressing the importance of the Jewish tradition in upholding standards of morality, that the IDF leads the way as a light unto the nations. I went on the ground in Gaza in September with an international panel of legal and military experts who were all astounded at the lengths that Israel's army takes to prevent civilian casualties, going way above the requirements of international law. That is the story that JNS proudly tells. That is the story that we need to be supporting, that we should be shouting proudly and as loudly as possible. And with all of your help, I fully believe that the eighth front is just as winnable as Israel has shown the other 7 to be. Thank you so much.